Hello, good day, and welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of Contenders. Contenders, not Contenders. I've ruined it immediately. That's a very
I can
Jesus
tell
Christ.
it's going fucking amazing, dude.
a very special episode of Refute This. That's what the name of this podcast is, not Contenders. That's a Blizzard TM. Which is a recap episode of Refute This. So Yiska came up with this idea, which was to review I believe it's 9 episodes we've done so far, right? Am I missing one?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9.
There you go. True. I'm a bloody genius. I can count to 9. That's nearly used up all of my fingers. As soon as we get to 11, I won't possibly be able to. But Bren will, interestingly, because he has extra fingers as a man from Gloucester. So we're gonna run back through the Refute This episodes that we've done in the past and kind of review with the benefit of hindsight who won the episode or who was correct in terms of their predictions. And I'm sure we'll be able to debate even the ones that were obviously won in terms of whether people were right for the wrong reasons or whether people had like good analysis on it and stuff like that.
Sure.
So if we go back to the beginning of these episodes that we did, the first one is just an absolutely brutal one, which I'm not even willing to touch, kind of, which was you had the idea that Fleta, not Ryu Jae-hong, is the world's best player.
Yeah.
So feel free to defend that one, because Jae-hong's looking super hot right now.
Well, to be fair, the Fleta thing at the time was probably right, especially for stage 1. He looked fucking insane, didn't he? Like, I'm not sure if he was actually the best player now, also that how we evaluate Jonak, even though I don't remember quite how he performed in stage 1. But
we'll get on to Jonak in number 2 of these.
But no, for the time, I think the argument is basically not really if Fleta was better than Ryu Jae-hong. He definitely was. But if he was actually the best player in the world. So
Sure, absolutely. Is whether or not Fleta was the world's best player. And even when they came out on Seoul Dynasty early on, they didn't look incredible. But Fleta still put up MVP performances for them pretty much every match he played, I would say. It was rare that Fleta didn't look excellent at the beginning of the season. But having said that, it was, I think, fairly obvious even early on in the Overwatch League, the Overwatch League, that NYXL were the best team. I think it was between NYXL and London Spitfire for the longest time until it got to the playoffs. And I think that you could have made the argument for a number of NYXL players even early on in the league, despite Fleta's excellent performances.
Yeah. If you remember, at the time when we did this, I actually changed the name Fleta around a bunch because it initially wasn't Fleta, it initially was Profit. And now, if I had done that, I would feel very confident right now and also over the season. Like, I'm currently preparing content that it's fucking appalling that a guy like Profit is not getting his respect that he deserves over the season because he was nuts consistent, has some great peak performances and everything. I think even if I slotted Profit in there right now over the entire season, yes, you probably would have to give it to Shonak. But what happens if London actually makes it to the final? Profit just has a Profit performance, and he actually wins that.
And interestingly as well, was that even when you were content on settling on Fleta, I was considering going Profit to try and counter that rather than Jae-hong, because Profit had just come off a ridiculous performance in Apex Season 4. Then he'd had an incredible performance in APAC, and it seemed likely that he would be able to continue that. But as I remember, this first episode was just after the preseason had happened, if I remember correctly, where Profit was having kind of weird performances on a couple of heroes, and they just lost to LA Gladiators and things like this, where it didn't seem 100% that they were going to be able to carry that through to the Overwatch League. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think that Profit would have been a very reasonable choice at this point, and in fact would have been probably the most reasonable at that point, because Profit had not just come off an incredible performance, as we just said, but seemed to have a very strong performance on a team that had already had really good teamwork. And I feel like these kind of performances, where the team doesn't necessarily have to play around you a huge amount, you're just still having incredible performances, seem to translate more into future performances rather than requiring the entire team to play around you or it being necessitative of a certain team style. So even though I wouldn't say that Profit is the world's best player right now, I would say I would be much more empathetic to past Sideshow that had picked Profit than past Sideshow who picked Ryu Hong. Because if for a moment I can rip myself, my past self, that even at the time that I had picked it was a bit of an out there pick that was a bit dated. And it was kind of predicated on an incredibly long I think it was 7-month history of dive meta being prevalent, and them being able to play the same kind of style where Jaehong was playing the Zen or the Ana, was playing alongside Toby on the Lucio, and was able to create this nice dynamic between them and kind of bait himself and be a boon to the team. Whereas what we saw in the Overwatch League was a big turn away from that. Almost no Lucio being played the entire season. No Ana being played the entire season. It really hurt them, but the signs were there at that point. So the interesting thing to me is, Yiska, if we look at this first series that we did, that was just over an hour of us debating whether Flutter or Jaehong was the world's best player, who do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, is the world's best player right now?
Well, it probably has to be Jonak, right? Even though he's currently, like, I haven't watched the games. That's the problem. So we're recording this the evening after watching the games, and they're on at a terrible time.
Delightful. That was just some random crash of Discord, which I will try and get back up.
All right, but can I keep going?
Give me a moment, because I'm trying to recover my camera. Turn on the camera, recover it. There we go. Listen, I think we leaked a couple of messages there, but in totality, we're fine. Yeah, go for it.
This is going marvelously.
Marvelous.
I think, for instance, he's a deserved season MVP, Jonek, that is. Now, I weight playoff performances very highly. So maybe after the playoff finals, I will be able to give you a different name, because I'm pretty high on Profit right now.
You still think that Profit is the best, despite the performances by NYXL throughout the season and Philadelphia coming into the playoffs, for example, and performing incredibly? And I mean, have you? I don't want to spoil anything. I know that we're talking to an audience now that would know the semifinal first match results, but having seen where we're at, have you seen the semifinal results at the beginning? Am I spoiling anything by telling you the first match of the semifinals?
I saw the results.
Okay,
I didn't watch the games.
So the semifinals have gone fairly heavily in Philadelphia's way, or at least the first match has. A 3-0 was the beginning. That's where we're recording these videos. With Carpe and EQO stepping up massively and having great performances throughout the series. Yep. So, I mean, Carpe was an MVP candidate throughout. I mean, EQO has also been an MVP candidate throughout, I would say.
The problem with both of these is that they were not playing enough, I think, over this season. They were actually substituted a fair bit more than Profit was.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think the Carpe played every game for the Philadelphia Fusion.
Are you sure? I'm pretty sure that's not true, because they also had their Korean flu troubles for a time. It was
only at the very end of stage 3 or the beginning of stage 4, where they subbed Carpe out for a while and said, we want to rest our best player. Because apart from that, they were playing Carpe Snello, or they were playing Carpe EQO, or playing Carpe Shadowburn for the entire season. And so I think the amount that Carpe was substituted out does not disqualify him from World's Best Player kind
EQO, of. I would say.
EQO, Shadowburn was playing at the beginning of the season, I think, for at least the first stage. I can't quite remember when EQO turned 18. But I think it was early enough on in the season for it to be reasonable. A guy like Space, I think, is a great addition to the team, but perhaps he joined slightly too late for the LA Valiant for them to really raise him up as the World's Best Player candidate. What are your thoughts in terms of World's Best Player in terms of the role they have in our team? Do you think it's ever possible for like a Mercy player, for example, to be the World's Best Player?
Well, it could be if you incorporate intangibles in with the evaluation of a player, which is very hard because you will never get complete information on that in a total sense. But if we had an absolute truth machine that can value all these, intangible,
I think they call that Bren.
Yeah, definitely.
Bren is the only guy on the desk to have got a prediction correct in the whole of the playoffs.
Jesus.
It's madness, right? Because the playoffs, we're evaluating them match by match. We're not evaluating them over the course of a series. We're not giving predictions over the course of a series. Otherwise, we would have got most of them correct already. Or at least one of them. Because most of us predicted Philadelphia over the course of the series to get it correct. But we thought Boston would win the first one and Philadelphia would win the second one and the third one.
Okay.
And Gladiators, actually. We thought that Gladiators would win the beginning couple. But anyway, it's madness. So the point is, it's just been crazy in the playoffs so far, to the point where Bren is the only person to have got a match prediction correct. Because even today, we thought that the NYXL, you can't really bet against them because of their record so far. You can't weight rumors or like scrim results or what you gut instinct of how you think the patch would go above just their dominant record so far. Yeah, if you're reasonable, you have to bet on the NYXL. And same situation for the LA Valiant. They've looked so good at the end of stage 4 compared to London Spitfire, who've just been kind of riding a hot streak. Who knows when that'll dip or when that'll end. So I don't feel bad at all for Crumbs or for Reinforce for betting on both the NYXL and the Valiant. But they were wrong both times. So
I love how you just shoehorned your like a segment where you are able to justify your awfulness and predictions somehow into that topic.
Don't worry about it. I've got this down.
It seems to weigh very hard on your mind, and it's coming out right now. But
it's like an anchor on my brain.
Yeah, here's the thing. So back to the question you asked. I think it's quite possible that if we had full information, that a player like Arc would be ranked very highly. A player like Neptuno could be ranked very highly in terms of what they provide to their team. Well, Nuss is a strange one. Big Goose, if we're talking about main supports, right? Like, they're definitely, especially support lines, made a huge difference up until stage 3, I think, where especially like Zenyatta's, I think Baroy had like a golden rule where you could rank Zenyatta performance almost perfectly to this ranking of the respective team at the time.
It's just so important.
Yes. So definitely, for instance, the backline of Gladiators probably also doesn't get enough praise. They're definitely, let me think. Well, I would say the best Western backline, probably better than Phillies. Yeah, and they also, like, they're definitely better than Souls, which is something nobody would have said pre-season, right? So
true. Okay, so who is your choice for world's best player before we move on? At this point in the playoffs.
Oh, so at this very time, at this very moment, like power level stuff, like if I have a power level counter from Dragon Ball. Haven't seen today's matches. You know what? Like, profit all the way, mate.
Okay. At this point, I'm still gonna say Jonak was the league MVP. Like performed
Yeah.
really well all season. All right, let's move on because we're at 1 out of 9 right now, and God knows how
Yeah.
long we've been going on for it.
Yes.
So the second one, you can see why I wanted to move on, is because we've
Fuck
gone
it
from
up.
me trying to defend Ryuji Hong to me saying that this was actually again your assertion that NYXL will underperform in Overwatch League Season 1. I mean, that's potentially the most indefensible
Yes.
assertion once it
that's
actually
the
came
biggest
to the
L of my
league.
life. Like,
So yeah,
fucking unreal.
given that this was the biggest loss of your entire life, tell me what your thought process was. Like, how did you get caught so unawares?
So I thought, for instance, that sitting out on Epic Season 4 was a huge problem for NYXL, which it, definitely didn't turn out to be. But the thing is, I questioned what that was. Were they getting rusty? What's happening? They were probably just rebuilding good habits into these players and didn't see the point in educating the world and therefore also rising the level of everyone else to be up there. So in my mind, it was like, okay, you have a couple of known players. I also thought that, well, that is probably one of the worst ones, was Sebi Olby would dip in performance. Definitely didn't, I have to say.
No. Even today, actually, like I know that you haven't watched the games, but Sabiolby is one guy in terms of NYXL's performance today where they got 0 and 3 stomped in terms of the overall score. The individual maps were not stomps, but Sabiolby came out clutch time and again. Like he played a lot of Tracer. He was actually subbed out for a couple of maps as well, which are going to be question marks when we look back at this series in the future. It's a classic Sabiolby playoff performance or a Sabiolby big game performance where he just came out and destroyed. This guy has exceeded expectations of him, even when we knew that he was a great player coming into the league.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, also him picking up Widow now, he's far from... I also didn't realize probably at the time how young he still is and how much growth potential there still was in him. So that was I think that is one of the most indefensible points I had in that episode, because the other ones, for instance, I was thinking, okay, what about that tank line? So Mano was previously in Africa Freaks Blue, and there he played quite one-dimensional, right? He was usually the guy
He was fucking sick in AF Blue. He was
sick. Yeah, he was sick, but he was also the guy that camped away and basically got a lot of kills back on with his what was his off tank?
Donghyun.
Donghyun, and I was like, how good is this guy if Donghyun is not with him, right? And we didn't see him after AF Blue whatsoever. His performance was definitely also boosted by having a very easy playoff bracket. That was a question. Janus was definitely, yeah, I mean, he wasn't the world's best tank, but I thought, yeah, maybe there's some potential. So I don't feel too bad for undervaluing Mano there. But the thing is where I still don't think that the point at the time was that terrible, was saying that Jonak was a big question mark, simply because he had never hit a tournament game. We only knew him from streams, and come on, man, like if we're talking stream performance, then Caffrey would have to be one of the best players in Overwatch League or whatever.
I mean, to be fair, that's a bit of hyperbole, because Caffrey's never been number one on the ladder, indisputably playing some like low impact hero, right? Whereas Jonak actually did go into the top playing Ana predominantly and a little bit of Zenyatta as well as that. So yes, the signs were there that this guy had potential, but some guys, for instance, Evermore, who reached 5k MMR or MMR, 5k SR on Roadhog, that guy actually had an incredibly underwhelming performance when he played for Kongdu Panthera at the time and really didn't do anything on Roadhog.
Exactly, yeah.
He got hyped up massively. All the good shit he did was like, wow, look how good that was. All the bad shit he did was like, okay, he's just a solo queue hero. And so really when you look at his play, it was clear that he underperformed in terms of what you would want to expect from somebody that had such good SR. But Jonak ended up living up to it massively, more than anyone could have expected. In fact, even I, when I was talking about it and talking about how much the Koreans were rating him as a monster, like, I think there's also a difference between this guy is number one on the ladder and this guy's number one on the ladder, and people are talking about him like he's some kind of incredible beast. A lot of the times when the other pro players are talking about somebody as like, this guy is fucking insane, you have to pay a little bit of attention, I think, because they don't just say that about any solo queue warrior. They tend to talk about that in terms of like how literally good somebody is. But I agree. I kind of got lucky on Jonak. He ended up being just an insane monster, the likes of which we've potentially never seen before. He was like the second coming of Jae Hong. He ended up revolutionizing the whole of what we would consider a support hero to be able to do.
Yeah.
But even then, NYXL did not. I mean, even if NYXL had like the 5th best Zen in the league, this team was still really sick. You got to take the L on this one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, just in results, it's pretty evident that this was a terrible, probably the worst one of the series. I would, we will see, but it could be the biggest L of all the ones we did.
It could be. Let's move on to the next one then, which was my assertion. We finally got onto one that I was the pro for, which was Contenders Korea will overtake the Overwatch League. Now, I don't know what the time frame was for this. I can't really remember whether I was asserting that it was Season 1 or Season 5 or something. But I think this one's a really interesting one to still debate, because there's no, as far as we know, as far as has been announced, there are planned to be no big tournaments that are open in the off-season. There's been no big Overwatch Open E-League tournament that has been announced in the off-season. There is going to be no big show match between, for example, I mean, I would put forward Element Mystic. Obviously, they lost in the playoffs to X6, but they just absolutely wrecked them about a week ago as well.
Yeah.
But these big teams in Contenders Korea against the Overwatch League teams. And so at the moment, because the Overwatch League teams have been unable to have been unable to take broadcasted matches against anybody else, both because of the schedule that they're under and also because there's just been no large tournaments. It's very difficult to assess how close I was in asserting this, but it does seem reasonable, I think, with the benefit of hindsight, to say that the Overwatch League has outpaced the rest of the scene, I think. Even I think, would argue against this. When you look at the Overwatch League and the meta that it's produced and the skill of everybody and how it's raised everybody up, unless you are a very good team and you are able to scrim against OWL teams regularly, you are unlikely to have reached the level that the OWL teams are at. Because it has created its own meta in terms of, if you try and run, like the European teams, some weird cheesy tank compositions into the OWL teams, it may take them a match. It may take them a couple of matches. They are probably going to be able to shut that shit down because they've seen it many times before. The Contenders Korea teams that I've seen play are playing at a very high skill level, but they are still playing the same shit that we have seen time and time again from Korea, which is Lucio, Zen kind of dive compositions with Winston, Diva. People know how to play against that. You have to be incredibly high skill level to be able to beat the OWL teams. I don't deny that I think that I was correct in saying that the Contenders Korea teams are probably going to be on a similar level to many of the OWL teams. I don't think that the entirety of OWL would be able to defeat the entirety of Contenders Korea, but I do think that the 4 playoff teams we have at the moment are probably above everybody else in the world.
Yeah, most definitely. And also, I still think like a team right now like LA Gladiators would also just run over Contenders Korea most likely.
Even if they play iRemix?
Well, I mean,
iRemix Gladiators against non-Sparkle Element Mystic. Let's get it going.
This is the worst timeline. No, but I think in general, for instance, if you put a prime Element Mystic into Overwatch League, I think they have a chance to make it to playoffs. But they also have to consider that just how much more resources these Overwatch League teams have. Not only do they have more staff, they have a team house with like huge opportunities. They have a cook, whatever. They streamline the experience and the the mental aspect of it all. But you also have to consider that they have higher quality scrims because also the best Korean teams are now playing in LA, right?
Yes.
So these have been sucked out. And that was also one of my big points. I remember back then was that all the coaching talent, or most of the coaching talent, most of the player talent has been vacuumed out of the scene and brought into Overwatch League. And it's very hard to stand on the shoulders of your giants if they are not even competing against you, right? It's very, you basically have to practice from afar. And sometimes, theory is all fine and dandy, but you need the practical aspect. This is where you really raise up your level. You need to see if your stuff works against the world's best, right?
Yeah.
I still think, by the way, you were saying EM lost to X6. I think they lost to
Oh,
O2.
sorry. Yeah, they lost to O2
Right.
Ardeon. Yeah. Mad wrong.
We're now.
But X6 won the entire thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and now X6 is looking weird, but yeah, I wonder.
They also beat O2 Ardeon. Like, I was right in saying that it was a revenge match that they won. I was just wrong with the wrong team. But also Runaway beat X6, so it was like.
I think you might still get some closure on the question, is even if we don't have comparable tournaments, I think there's a high chance that new expansion teams will just pick up at least the core of one of these rosters, like Runaway or whatever, and you'll just get to see them compete there, maybe in preseason, where it's still, relatively comparable, skill level they have to their, contenders' performance. Because I think even before then, if the host org actually allows this, they could still play like a round of contenders in Korea till the Overwatch League starts, I think, like after this recent contender season.
In theory, I doubt that would actually happen, but yeah. I think if there was, the weird thing as well is that one of the things that you were asserting in this video, which I found really interesting that I hadn't thought of, was that whenever you have a really good Contenders Korea team that has one key carry guy, they are likely to get picked up by an expansion team or get picked up by somebody that's already in OWL, and that kind of ruins the Contenders Korea team. And I thought that was a really interesting point that you raised. And the only counter to that is that some of the Contenders Korea players who are kind of carry people are underage and not violent, and are too young to actually get picked up by OWL. And also that there are more Contenders kind of seasons per year than there are OWL seasons. So in the large off season of Overwatch League, it's possible that the best teams in the world take a very lengthy off season, as is probably healthy for a lot of the players that are at the top of their game and have been competing an unbelievable amount of hours from January through to August or September. Whereas the Contenders, people who are still much more hungry and are really trying to make their name, end up playing a lot more and perhaps end up outpacing them. And I mean, referencing back to that kind of situation last year where, for example, the South Korean team got beaten by Element Mystic when they were playing those kind of practice games before the World Cup began. I think it would be really interesting actually to have a big open qualifier tournament for something like an Overwatch Open run by E-League or something like that, because I think it would actually be very interesting to see how the best teams from each region paired up against the Overwatch League. And I don't think that it's just de facto that the people that are in OWL are better. I think a lot of it comes down to what practice do you have playing against different styles, how much do you know your opponent, how much have you really researched a certain strategy that counters your own strategy.
Yeah.
So, and like you said, certain Contenders Korea teams may get picked up by OWL next season and end up becoming the best team in the Overwatch League. So
yeah, as one last point on this topic is, like, I said that I thought the talent wouldn't be developed as quickly simply because the play rates were dropping in the PC banks. And yes, the play rates are dropping in the PC banks, at least from, these are two relative time points where we were and then where we are now, even though I think it's going up a little bit. after the grouping, the new features, introduced to Overwatch. But this, I have to agree, actually didn't slow down their talent development at all from the looks of Contenders. Because if I'm looking at the current Contenders Korea region, there's a load of new talents. So, for instance, there's an Edison, marvelous Widowmaker, and he's like, that's not even my best pick. My best pick is Tracer, right? So this guy, definitely one of the hottest free agents. I'm not sure if he's of age yet. There's stuff like Alpha Yi that's not talked about enough. He's a marvelous Genji, for instance, which is hilarious, by the way. Alpha Yi, I think that has to be a wordplay, from League of Legends. I don't know if you played it with Master Yi, and the thing is called Alpha Strike, and it's basically a little bit like Genji.
League of Legends.
But it's a low skill ability.
No idea what you're talking about there.
It's a low skill ability that's Genji-esque, but obviously Genji is nuts hard in Overwatch, so he's performing pretty well on that. A tune. Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to come up with the names right now, but there's like at least 5 players that just looking marvelous, and that could be the star player for an Overwatch League team right now.
And who we wouldn't have thought at the beginning of the season. Like there's some guys like Dako who we would have thought at the beginning of the season, but there's a lot of people like Edison, for example, who we wouldn't have thought at the beginning of the season who turned out to be a lot better, and people who've kind of dropped off. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. Because the next one is London Spitfire are sandbagging. And I also saw your incredibly entertaining video recently, which was about NYXL's sandbags being empty, and that didn't turn out as well, given that they've lost 0-3 in their first match against the Philadelphia Fusion.
I will say to this, though, like, how are people so quick to jump on that ship? Like, have they not watched Spitfire getting shreked by iRemix Gladiators, and then coming back a couple of days later, absolutely clapping nerds back, right? Like the clapback of the century. But I also think, okay, here we go.
Okay.
NYXL is still sandbagging.
Okay, all right.
Why the hell, at least to some extent, why the hell is Libero not on Hanzo?
I don't think he did. Am I wrong in saying he didn't play a minute of Hanzo?
Maybe he played 2 minutes of Hanzo in the match, supposedly.
Okay, I don't remember those 2 minutes, but I'll believe it. I'll believe it. But I agree with you. I was watching their compositions the entire time, and I was thinking, why have you fielded Sabiobi and Pine for the first match on Dorado? And I thought, perhaps this is just because you want to push them out of their comfort zone. You want to play a lot of Tracer so that they're kind of distracted in the backline and their snipers have to deal with your Tracer. Then they ended up moving over to the Brigitte and played that very well and ended up clutching it in the final moments of Dorado. Having said that, the match was incredibly close. But overall, you got to wonder why they aren't just playing Libero and Sabiobi.
Yeah.
Because if you... So there's a couple of ways to look at this, though, I think. Is that maybe they have tried just playing the meta and what they think is the best, and it hasn't been working. Because I think something that I was streaming a couple of days ago, and I was saying that I'm a little concerned about NYXL in the current meta. And a lot of the people that were watching my stream were saying, how can you be concerned when they have some of the best Widowmakers in the entire league, in Pine and Sabiolbi, who stepped up massively in Stage 4, and then the best Hanzo in the entire league in Libero? And I said, there is a massive difference in terms of picking up a hero early when it's not meta and making the best use of it, as Libero did with Hanzo, and perfecting it when it is meta. I think those are two very different skills. And I think that guys like, for example, EQO and perhaps Prophet have done a very good job at really perfecting how you would want to play a very aggressive Hanzo in the current meta, which Libero may not have been able to keep up with. And that is similar to me with Jake on Junkrat, for example, because when we first saw that hero being used, Jake easily seemed like the best Junkrat in the entire league. You fast forward a while, and guess what? Another name that's cropping up again, EQO, turns up on Junkrat. For my money, easily the best Junkrat in the league, plays it incredibly aggressively, huge amount of damage done, topping the stats in basically everything in terms of his Junkrat play, just absolutely destroying the field. Would we have considered him the best Junkrat early on in the season? No, he didn't play it. He didn't play a lot of it. That wasn't the style of the team. But as soon as it becomes meta, different people take it on and end up really refining what you have developed as the first team to take it on.
True. The thing is, the only thing I have to say about this is that I talk to Overwatch League players that I trust to have a good read on power levels, I guess, who are also scrimming NYXL, and they were just saying, well, Libero is the real deal in Hanzo. So I wonder if there's also the potential that the NYXL staff or the Pavane and Wizard Young are overthinking how to beat Philly, or they are just losing these mind game battles altogether. Because Philly over the season, also in the stage playoff run they had, were pretty good at catching people off guard. Especially, I remember the London series. We had some very unorthodox strategies, like winning 5v6 battles simply because of a offbeat sense of momentum that they created that wasn't able to be read by London. And I think their coaching staff is actually pretty good at curveballs in general. I think they just hit it better than the NYXL staff currently did. It's possible that this was something that was developed in the run-up to. I mean, it's not impossible. For instance, if you think, who did Philly play first?
Boston.
Boston. Maybe Philly, NYXL was like, we'd rather have Philly against us than Boston. Let's scrim against Philly a bunch. And there's some counter strategies going on there.
No, it was actually revealed today as well that Philly have not played against New York the entire time in terms of scrims, whereas Valiant and Spitfire have been playing against each other regularly. So we've got like a weird kind of mix in terms of like how much the teams have actually been scrimming against each other. In terms of just the overall season, though, do you think so? Your idea, if I was to lay it out, was that London Spitfire, if you take the best possible roster of London and really put them at their peak performance and in terms of what their coaches are able to get from them, would be able to beat any team. Do you think that was a thing that they had deliberately or otherwise fucked up early in the season and is now coming true in the playoffs? How do you like marry your early perceptions of London with what's happening throughout the season and then now?
So the thing so here's a little bit of a problem with the definition of sandbagging is if you are unconscious of your sandbagging, is it sandbagging? Is a conscious element of you not playing the best you could factor in sandbagging? I think it's just about proving that London wasn't playing the best Overwatch they could simply by slotting in these these 4 players. I would
say that's true, but I would also say that sandbagging has to be a conscious thing, because otherwise you could just say that like bad coaching or bad gameplay is sandbagging, which doesn't seem to make sense to me.
That still could be the case, though. I have no idea if those were maintenance runs where they wanted to have some play time for these players, so they have not only a chance next season, they command higher
they can
fees from other teams, sell them for more. Yeah, you possibly nurture one of these players to become a real backup, and I think Huyol made a good case for himself. Even though Fury is obviously marvelous, and Huyol would probably started on many Overwatch League teams, even playoffs teams, if I'm being honest. For instance, if I think like Hotbar in comparison to Huyol, I think I take Huyol every single time.
I agree.
So
can Huyol play Tracer?
That's a good question, I guess.
Who knows?
Yeah, but no. The thing is with London, I think there's still a possibility that they consciously chose to field these players like Hureg, like Huyal, like Hagopion. For Hureg, he came at I wasn't as problematic for me when he came in instead of Birdring, when Birdring was actually worse player legitimately than Hurek. There was a time in Overwatch League where I guess it was wrist issues, whatever that means in the Overwatch League.
Sure. As much as we believe that.
Where he was legitimately one of the worst DPS players in the Overwatch League. He was, at least in the way he performed. He had some appalling performances throughout that moment. Obviously, he popped back up. And as I explained in one of my content videos, I think a player that has high peaks and low lows is generally preferable to a guy that just consistently plays well, simply because you know when he has low lows, so you don't sub him in. And if he has high highs, you bring him in and win playoff series that way. And that's currently what's happening with the London Spitfire. So, but over the season, that doesn't give you an MVP performance. Also shouldn't give you an All-Stars performance, by the way. No, but I think in general, barring the conscious part of the sandbagging argument, I think at this point was just about proven by them releasing these players. By the way, despite Tizzy, who had never legitimately had a chance to start over Gesture, other than maybe on Reinhardt. And I don't know how good Tizzy's Reinhardt is. But yeah, I think like London, did my prediction of the Triple H being the three horsemen, if you like, of just mediocrity became true, and they released them accordingly.
Well, I think it's interesting for me because when they released them, that did not correlate with an increase in skill. They continued,
not immediately.
They continued to go downwards almost until the end of the regular season. And in fact, until the Wednesday that they lost to the Gladiators, they did not have great performances the entire time throughout Stage 4. And continued just to simply beat up on bad teams and lose to the good teams. And it is purely this playoff run that seemed to vindicate this point that they were, in some sense, sandbagging, or I think a better way to phrase it would be that they did not realize the potential that was on this team and failed to live up to what was possible for them. And I think a lot of it has to come down to the coaching staff for failing, not strategically, but failing to implement a vision for the team, failing to implement a great mentality that would allow them to really focus on one thing and feel like they're all together in terms of a team, and really go into the games feeling like they were going to win, or at least they were going to give their best and these kind of things.
Yes.
And to work on whatever was going wrong with guys who were slumping like Birdring, and to be able to work on little mechanics like, for example, the hero switches and stuff like that, which they barely fucking worked on in time for the playoffs. Yeah. And so this London Spitfire situation, they certainly seem like a team right now that could beat anybody. I would not be overly surprised if London ended up winning this season, and I would not feel like it was 100% undeserved. But I would feel like their coaches contributed minimally to the results that they were having, because I have not seen a large... It just seems like they fortuitously improved in time for the elimination matches. It did not seem like I was seeing a London that really understood what was happening coming into the playoffs. It certainly didn't seem like a London that understood how best to play the game when they first tackled the Gladiators. At the moment, they are still playing their kind of individualistic style, but with the foundations of much better teamwork and much better hero swapping, which was never there earlier on in the season. And Birdring is now playing a lot better. But from talking to the team and from the interviews that they've done, I wonder how much of this is genuinely conscious decision and how much of it is pure chance that they've suddenly lucked upon something at the end of the season, or that they've decided now is time to really try at the end of the season. I suppose if it is the situation that they have just decided to try their hardest at the end of the season, they were sandbagging, right? That is the definition of sandbagging. To suddenly try in the playoffs and realize it's all on the line and to play your best. That means for the rest of the season, you really didn't give a fuck and were sandbagging at that situation. I think it's pretty difficult to tell without a real intense look at what was going on with that team. But something that's... Oh, go on, carry on.
I think what basically some of it is just very infuriating in how it worked out. So, for instance, you have the sandbags, and there is an argument to be made. Also, now seeing with NYXL that sandbagging for a while also in the aftermath of the sandbagging decreases your level because you simply don't have the practice of the competition. How is it sitting on stage to have that synergy, to try your hardest, whatever. What I will say though is I think what they now switch to is Spitfire looked like a team that tried way too hard to have rigid strategies. So I know for a fact that there were matches where they encountered that specific strategy they were running against a week prior in scrims, and they still didn't switch anything up and were running into people. For instance, do you remember the game against Dallas on Blizzard World with the forward hold at the they were running into that for 4 minutes, changing up absolutely like way too. I don't think they had that many hero switches, but definitely not radical enough. So I think what they now switch to, and it's hilarious that it's portrayed as a eureka moment by Nuss in some interview where he said, "Oh, we realized we have to switch a lot in this meta." Bro, that was all of stage 4. What are you doing? Like, how is this even a consideration? How have you not realized this? So I think, especially, and I said it before, and I still believe it to a point where you could also make the argument for NYXL, but this roster of the 6 players on the London Spitfire are the highest skilled individual pound for pound players Overwatch has ever seen, other than possibly now NYXL. And I think they're up to par in terms of what they can do. So why would you harness them or put them in a cage in a rigid strategy when what you could do is just give them heuristics or like rules of thumb that they can adhere to? So for instance, in that situation, you just switch to that hero and then have their individual skill just overpower opponents. I think they were thinking about strategy way too much, like tunnel vision-y. And
the really interesting thing from talking to the players actually is that in terms of how they were describing it recently was that their coaches had hammered into their heads, if this is what we are looking at from our opponents, this is how we should play.
Mm-hmm.
And so this seemed to be the eureka moment for them, was that they had now got a sense on the meta in terms of this is what the enemy team is running, this is how we play. This is what we play and this is how we play, which seemed to feed down from the coaches into the players. And so for the entirety of the season, it seemed like they were just trying to outskill their opponents and play one thing or play a couple of things and just simply outplay them in terms of their individual skill. And now they've realized that swaps and out-strategizing in the very basic terms is very important to execute. And so that, to me as well, indicates that they simply just did not know what the fuck they were doing for most of the season. Like it was not in terms of like deliberate sandbagging, but it may have been an unintentional massive downgrade in terms of their skill because they just did not know what the hell they were doing in that meta. And God knows whether you can even, like, even if you had the best coach in the world, if you have some players who refuse to get it through their heads for a certain amount of time, or you just cannot communicate to them properly how to get through to them what is required. There might be some coaches who would explain it in a certain way and it would just absorb into you perfectly. I'm sure everybody who's watching has either watched some lecture or watched some video where suddenly something clicks where it hasn't done before. And it's just a difference in how someone's explaining it or how someone's presenting an idea. These kind of things can make an enormous difference. And it seems like London have just realized how to play this meta and how to, or any meta, honestly, that's happened since Stage 4. Since the Stage 4 and playoff meta are quite considerably different, as I tweeted about recently.
I think what happened was basically like the London coaches were reading The Art of War. And it's like, don't fear the guy that practices 1,000 kicks once. Fear the guy that practices one kick 1,000 times. It's like, Okay, so let's only play one strategy. Bro, that guy you were kicking, he just climbed into a tank. Well, my kick, I practiced it 1,000
Yeah,
times. Yeah,
don't
but
worry.
he's literally sitting in a German Leopard 2, like one of the top line tanks. What are you doing? Why are you kicking metal?
I
He will
love
keep
that.
on kicking, like-
I love that you just have the instant knowledge of just the pinnacle of German tanks. That's a fantastic little little snippet into the German mindset. Just we all know the best tanks. Okay, moving on. Philadelphia Fusion have the most potential, which was something that I had posited. I think at the just after Philadelphia Fusion had come into the finals of stage 2, it was maybe a couple of weeks after that. And I think my main point was Philadelphia Fusion have absolutely nuts individual skill. If you can pair them together into a system or put some kind of strategy on top of that, they got mad potential to dominate. I gotta be honest, this is a W for me, right? When you look at how well they're playing in the playoffs, like they're rolling.
So
They're doing super well.
That's a little bit of a like a ship of Theseus issue here, because is that actually the team you attributed high skill to? Because the complete tank line switched now, didn't it?
I said Sado has mad potential to improve. The guy was renowned for his skill, having never played a single match.
Yeah.
Same with Jonak, you know. Here's my trick. Is that I just find players that have been really high on the fucking rankings that everybody else says are really good. I never watched a match in my fucking life. I don't trust my own analysis, Yiska.
Yeah.
I trust other motherfuckers who've played against them or with them, and they're all like, "Oh, this guy's just fucking phenomenal," and I'm like, "This guy's the next coming of Christ. Listen to me, hear ye, hear ye. Jonak and Sado will dominate the league." One of them has to win the semi-finals. Like, I've bet on Jonak and Sado. One of them literally has to make the finals. So either way, I think I fucking played that perfectly.
Dude, and not gonna lie, part of me still thinks there's some very aggressive Reinhardt strategies they have in an ace up their sleeves, with Fraggy just coming in the finals, like last 2 maps or something of the final series, and on very good Reinhardt maps, and Fraggy just comes in, slaps people with an aggressive Reinhardt. That would be pretty sweet, I have to say. But yeah, in general, what do you feel like? Do you still feel they have the highest potential in the league? And do you think them winning the finals would actually prove that?
I do, yeah. I actually think for a while they were playing at a very poor level if we consider stage 4. And honestly, the beginning part of stage 3, I was very disappointed with Philadelphia Fusion, and I felt bad about this Refute This episode that I'd actually recorded, because I thought, God damn, Philadelphia Fusion have clearly got the skill, but right now they are shitting the bed.
Yeah.
And because I've been to the Philly house and talked to a lot of the players before and stuff like this, I knew that at the beginning of stage 3, it was a lot about the mentality stuff, because they had just been blown out. They'd just been reverse swept by NYXL in the stage 2 finals. Then they lost to, I believe it was the San Francisco Shock. Might have even been 4-0. I think it was at least a 3-1 or a 4-0. They got absolutely blitzed by them. And it really wasn't close. They'd like tilted themselves into oblivion. It was not a good situation for these guys. They're really quite emotional. But I think, in general, at the beginning of the playoffs, the way that we structure the desk and these kind of things is that we like to go for assertions. You know, if any of the analysts feel reasonable about calling somebody the best in the league, or the best at this, or the best at that, that's a great thing for the casual viewer to latch onto.
Yes.
So as long as we feel it's reasonable to make that assertion, the producers and the people who are running the show feel like that's a good thing to push us towards.
It is.
And so we agree with that. And so when I was looking at the Philadelphia Fusion coming into the quarterfinals, I felt reasonable saying that they were not just the most exciting team in the league to watch, which I believe, because they are just like a chaotic, mad team that can sometimes take control. I also felt it was reasonable to call the DPS duo of the Philadelphia Fusion the best in the league. And that was over guys like the NYXL's duo, who've been performing very well, and who a lot of the players at the time would have called the best DPS duo in the league because their entire team was working so well and CBL was so clutch, etc. And also that's over guys like Prophet and Birdring, who've yes, Birdring hasn't been performing well for the majority of the season, but when he's performing at his best,
Yes.
they can definitely make that kind of claim.
Yeah, if we were talking about potential, yeah.
But in terms of the stats that Carpe and EQO have been putting up all season, and especially in terms of when they both turn up, these guys, when you look at the situations where they're both playing very well, I think it's not just an argument you could make. I think it's an argument that you would have to make when you look at the stats that Carpe and EQO, when they're playing well, are the best DPS duo in the league. And the problems that Philadelphia Fusion have been having prior to the playoffs have been that their entire team is not working well enough around them to be able to utilize that. Fraggy originally was very aggressive, trying to make room for his DPS so that they could play this scrappy style. Sado and Hopper came in and they had more of a kind of all-round approach where they were keeping themselves a little more passive and not dying as much so that they could re-engage later, but then Carpe and EQO would overextend a little bit because I think they weren't as comfortable with how Sado and Hopper were playing. Even in the playoffs, their support line has been caught out of position quite a lot. Boombox has been caught out many times. And Neptuno even can try and go a little too aggressive to try and give heals to people he thinks are going to be able to carry the fight and get caught out. But if this team really nail it down, they have a top 3 Mercy easily, a really good tank line, or at least a really good main tank. Hopper at times is not that great, but Sado has been very good, especially on picks like the Orisa, and honestly his Reinhardt, I don't know whether he's been learning from Fraggy, but his Rhines looked really good as well. Sado's been pretty great in terms of his playoff performances.
Yeah.
So the Zen for the team is just kind of average, I would say. The Diva is just kind of average. But then the DPS line is so good that this team really just does have some mad potential to take over a game and roll through you. If you're playing a really conservative, disciplined style, this team can just go, fuck you, blast through you. You got snipers all over the place just absolutely pillaging you. So I think I would still... It's between Philly and London in terms of the teams with the most potential. And I would still say, I think, that Philly are the team with the most potential. If it came down to a Philly-London final and they were both playing at their peak
that would
form,
be sick, yeah.
It would be mental in terms of just... It would be mostly about the DPS, I think. And I think Carpe and EQO, especially EQO, is a very underrated player. I think EQO is up there with Space as the best Western player and deserves the credit for that.
Yeah, I think in a final like that, actually, this is where the Fraggy dream actually might come alive, because Gesture really didn't look that well against Gladiators. You could legitimately say Iron Remix outpaced him on Reinhardt in Reinhardt battles, just swinging.
They played a very small amount of Rhine over the course of that entire match, though.
Yeah. I mean, that is one thing, but in general, I think I still would support the London Spitfire, simply because Fury, many people say he's the best off tank in the league. You hear it from a lot of pro players. He's actually the off tank for... Wait, was he picked up for Team South Korea? No, Meko was, right?
Meko was. Fury was the second.
Yeah. So you have Gesture is definitely a top 3 tank in the Overwatch League, despite his slight weakness on Reinhardt, simply because he's the best Orisa in the league, and his monkey is obviously also nuts, right? So then you go to the EPS. We already talked about it. Problem for London really has been the inconsistency of a Birdring, but he has one of the sickest peaks. I think the only players that mesmerized more in their absolute Widow peaks, for instance, are probably Pine and Taimu. When they're just tip-top on, they're nuts, right? Okay. Obviously, how often does that happen to especially Taimu? But if he does, like, legitimately, he looks fucking insane. Also, you have to say side play in this.
Sure.
Bedosin is the second best Zenyatta in the league, or off tank. Flex support. I'm thinking off tank because I'm already thinking, well, he plays a pretty good Roadhog, right? So like this guy seems to be incredibly talented in what he does. Had a very solid performance over the season, even though then London lost his way, and then the breaking point then is the Zenyatta that just the teams have a much easier time if the team around you doesn't work synergetically. You necessarily will have bad stats. Nuss is a big question mark for me. Like, he's not as individually skilled. I think Nuss is the easiest to give away for like that. Neptuno is a better player. Once again, if we had a truth machine, I wonder how much these two players communicate towards the communication in their team, towards the atmosphere in general. Nuss has been generally explained to be sort of like the shot caller and the guy that, you know.
So I actually talked to the London Spitfire before they went into the playoffs and asked them about their calling structure, which I always find interesting for Korean teams, because even if you sit there and watch their scrims, I can't tell what the fuck is going on because I don't speak Korean. But I talked to the team and they said that Badoshin is the main caller for the team.
Okay.
Followed by Gesture, who does quite a bit of the calling for the team. They kind of split it between the two of them. The third person that calls the most is Nuss for the team.
Okay.
Whereas I think on the Philadelphia Fusion, it tends to be a little more evenly spread throughout the team, but they have credited EQO with a lot of the calling, and also Neptuno, I think, keeps it a little less and tries to just call the minimum he can for his position, whilst staying, whilst only calling the things that are relevant to him as a Mercy, and leaves that to the other people on the team, like for example, whoever the tank would be previously lifted to Fraggy and for Boombox as well.
Yeah. No, but that's maybe a topic for another time because I don't want to stretch this. But like, Harsha mentioned this to me, that this idea of the main support being the main shot caller is actually age old now and is not put in practice in Korean teams much at all. It's more like you want your one flex DPS to call, you want your main tank to call, and you want your flex support to call. I can only think, for instance, flex support is probably the most interesting part of that because we already knew that EQO was calling a bunch and it has something to do with vision. At the same time, obviously, it's a computational bottleneck if you're Genji, who's one of the highest, skilled roles in the Overwatch League, that then has to also communicate while he's doing these mad dashes and whatever.
I think, just to your point there, I think some of the teams use their diva to supplement that role because you have the defense matrix to be able to peek and get the same vision that the Genji can without actually being too mechanically compromised.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting how this will crystallize, but I think the support, especially on Mercy, as the main shot caller, is basically dead simply because, like, you can't peek the slightest angles. That's where you die to Widowmakers, right?
Yep.
So
and also it's surprisingly mechanically intensive.
Yeah.
From what
people are memeing,
people massively underestimate it, I think, in terms of, especially in this current support meta where you're looking at, it being easily the most pivotal role, where if you lose your Mercy, you have lost the entirety of your heals for the entire team. You can't possibly try and focus on anything other than staying alive and putting the heals on people that require it.
Yeah, and there's so many little mechanical tricks you can do with her that just, if the other player is not able to do it, it's almost like Winston, for instance, with the double smash in the primal rage stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff with Guardian Angel that's very very hard to do. Then there's stuff
and very much overlooked.
Yeah, there's stuff with Valkyrie where your wings can block the headshot hitbox or something like that. If you have all that in mind, right, it's incredibly, like, part of me actually thinks that Neptuno in this interview where he said Mercy is the hardest role in the Overwatch League, and then later came out and said, guys, it was a meme. I'm memeing. It's very easy.
I don't think he was totally
Part of me thinks he was actually half sincere in all of that.
No, I think he was. I think he was. Because also when you look at his other interviews, he was talking about how it took him a while to really get good at Mercy. He was saying that he was learning from Dayfly. He really didn't feel comfortable on Mercy at the beginning. Neptune is a guy who used to be at the top of the CS 1.6 scene in Spain and is kind of a born... It sounds stupid, but like a born gamer, you know? He just like understands things, yeah? But he also just understands the important shit and works on it and learns it. Anyway, my point is Philadelphia Fusion had the most potential.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, Neptune real quick, someone, like, maybe I'll do it if they make it to the final, but someone needs to create some content around this guy because he had one of the sickest turnarounds in Overwatch, and I think it's a little bit underlooked. Also, how hard he tries. Like,
EQO
he was
as well,
very,
mate.
He was very, very close to not making Overwatch League.
Yeah. EQO as well. EQO, nobody had really heard of him outside of the Israeli national team, and he trialed once for Complexity.
Yes.
That's all I knew about him. And then when you talk to him, when I've talked to him, I find EQO and Neptuno the two most interesting people to talk to in the entirety of the Overwatch League. Now, granted, I can't really talk like on a one-to-one basis with the Korean people because I don't understand Korean. I'm sure I would find some of those incredibly interesting to talk to. But if you ever want to create content, if there's any fucking Overwatch journalists listening, talk to EQO about his past and how he got into it. It's just madness. All right, next one. We're nearly there. Dallas should blow up their team despite recent success. I really feel like we haven't learned much more after we posted that.
No, there's not much to talk about, I think. I think at this point it's pretty much a given that they will do it, though. So Effect is out of the question. I know some other players are out of the question, so I'm pretty sure that this team will have a makeover come next season.
Yes, it certainly seems like it. And for Dallas, who the hell knows what's going to happen next season? This is one of just the random things about Overwatch and about patch changes and stuff like this. You just never know what the scene is going to look like. You just have to prepare as best you can. A lot of people coming into Overwatch League Season 1 thinking that it was going to be the dive meta and structured their teams around that, and at least structured their teams around like dive with a couple of options, but it certainly proved to be fairly far away from that at the end of the season. Certainly teams are playing very minimal amounts of dive, or certainly Soldier 76 Tracer dive. I mean, when was the fucking last time you saw that? Have you ever seen that in the last 5 months? I haven't, so... No. All right.
On Dallas, maybe.
Yeah, it's possible. Anything else to say about Dallas? I was out at Tasmo last night. He looked dejected. That's all I have to say. Brigitte killed Striker's MVP season. Have we learned anything more about that as well?
I think the only thing that I would contest is that I think there are bigger factors than Striker. Than Brigitte coming in, especially with Krusty and everything. Then also, it's not even just Brigitte being there. It's also that the meta generally shifted away from his picks. So, yes, there's the thing is you could still make the argument that the fact that people could pick Brigitte already brings the tracer rate down without Brigitte ever being picked, just the threat of it, because we are in a constant meta. Switching a meta situation where we constantly switch compositions based on what the other team is playing, or at least were. And I'm not sure if we know much more about this than we did at the time when we talked about this, but yeah, I'm still not convinced. I think also Striker received way too many MVP votes, even as second, third in that. That actually triggered Profit 0, Dia 1. Gregory 3.
All right, whoa, wait there. You just said Profit 0, which I agreed with you with. But then Dia 1, I was like, mate, even 1 is too many for Dia, right?
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck was that? And then Gregory 3, any is way too many for anybody on the fucking Shanghai Dragons. Nobody can be considered it. All right, so that was your point, right? Just to clarify, that was your point, that nobody should ever be voted MVP of a team that went 0-40.
Yeah.
Yes, because nobody could ever be the most valued player of a team that went 0-40.
Yeah.
All right. The 5.
No, but basically striker. I don't think anyone even had him as first MVP in the voting today.
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Have you got a delivery called?
Yes, but I guess they have to bring it someone else. Okay, no.
Go for it.
I have to.
We can chop this up. We can chop this up.
All right. No, it's fine.
All right. Okay. The 5 worst mid-season signings. Now, I don't know whether you can remember any of yours, but I don't think we've actually seen any of the others play this entire season.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were any of them relevant? I have no idea.
I don't think anything changed really about that too much.
I think
we need still more input.
There was one interesting thing actually that I learned during this offseason, or rather during the gap between the regular season and the playoffs, which was that when we're talking about the sister team of the LA Valiant, when they played that game against the Shanghai Dragons, we actually went and talked to the Valiant team before they played the playoffs, and something they said, guys, could you talk about this? You know, some things they tell us and they're like, don't mention this on stream, but this is just for your personal knowledge, you know.
Yeah.
And then some things they tell us and they're like, but spin it in like a nice way for us, you know. And some things they tell us and they're like, do not talk about this.
Yeah.
Which I'd love to share with everybody, but unfortunately I can't.
Yeah.
And then they told us this, which was like they really wanted us to share because it makes them seem better. Which was that when their 4 players of their sister team played against the Shanghai Dragons and got full held on Gibraltar A, the reason I was giving them shit because they didn't play Finzi and Iziaki, and all the word on the street was that Iziaki was really sick. The guy's like a really good player. We've seen him in previous teams. He's played really well. Finzi I didn't think was great, but I thought, guys, if you're going to play 4 of them, you might as well play all of them. They've had that like synergy built together. They've got like the 6 of them. They should be able to play better than this shocking performance you put up against Shanghai. But the reason they couldn't do it is because they had visa issues where when you're trying to get a P1 visa for people, they have to come here on a travel visa, apply for the visa, go back home to have an interview at their home country, come back here with a work visa, etc. And both Finzi and Iziaki at the time were playing very well in terms of their scrims against the LA Valiant A team, but were not eligible to play in the regular season. So they weren't able to actually play. And so Shanghai Dragons absolutely demolished them. But there you go. In terms of the 5 worst mid-season signings, perhaps it was foolish for the LA Valiant to play those 4 players anyway, like KSF and Numlocked, as were some of our picks, I think, for the worst mid-season signings. And I don't know how much impact they really had in making the LA Valiant as good as they could be. I don't know how much weight they really put into these sister team scrims and stuff like this. Still seems like not that much. But in terms of how poorly they looked when they were actually fielded, it seems like a lot of those situations were out of their hands.
Yeah. All right, and the last one is just, I mean, that nothing really changed.
Sire player is in the Alcatraz of roster jails, which was your assertion. With the title stolen from Hexagrams when we asked him what the title should be.
I mean,
how about this then?
One thing.
Honestly, I'm going to go from roster jails to most disappointing team. I'm going to take you on a bit of a segue so that we end it on an interesting note. Most disappointing team this season, I had during Stage 4, the Florida Mayhem, because they had come off being a really good team that most people expected to win the EU contender season. Yes, they didn't quite win the EU contender season, but they had dominated the entire way through. They end up being absolutely, shockingly dog shit over the entirety of the Overwatch League Season 1. Okay? A very good candidate. Then I changed my mind. As soon as Seoul failed to make the playoffs, I was like, fuck me, it's got to be Seoul Dynasty. Seoul Dynasty have got to be the most disappointing team of the entire season. They come in 2-time Apex champions, all the talent on their team to be able to make a very deep run in the playoffs, strong team all round, potential MVP candidate in Fleta. They failed to even make the 7th place. I think they ended up in 8th, right? Behind the Houston Outlaws. Shocking performance from Seoul. And the removal of their coaches mandated, in my opinion. All right. And then somebody today, I think it was Matt Morello, said to me when we were in the green room, he said, "This might sound dumb, Josh, but I think NYXL, if they go 0-3 again against Philly, would be the most disappointing team of the season. To have dominated so strongly throughout the entirety of the regular season and then go out without winning a map in the playoffs when it really matters, does that not make them the most disappointing team of the season? Is Matt not right there?
I mean, that's definitely... Like, if they actually go out without ever actualizing their potential once again, and that whole sandbagging shebang doesn't work out for them, yeah, it would be pretty disappointing. The interesting thing is, I think my biggest disappointment you actually didn't mention yet, and that is the runner-up for the season MVP not playing a single game in the playoffs. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Like,
very reasonable.
I was like, okay, there's a lot of disappointment in me after the season, but surely there's not that much disappointing stuff in the playoffs. Nope. There's much more disappointment to be had. So definitely NYXL, if they actually, it's one thing for NYXL to go out, and it would be tragic, but at the same time, I wouldn't mind it as much if Philly was playing nuts. As much as Philly has turned it on, I think from what I've heard so far, and again, I have to watch the series, it looks like it's more like NYXL is not showing up. And
so it's a bit of both, for sure.
That's, if this continues to happen, yes, that's a huge disappointment. Also, it seemed unbelievable to have a final without the NYXL.
Absolutely.
Before the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like, in my mind, I was giving NYXL before the playoffs a 70% chance to win the finals. Keep in mind, there are 6 other teams in the playoffs, and they have to play 2 matches in order to get the 70%, right? 70% is mad high for a team to be playoff favorites. Now, obviously, one could argue, what about the recency? What about, well, I could easily explain that away with the sandbagging part. What I didn't anticipate is that they would drop like this. Then again, as I said at the beginning of the episode, I don't buy it yet. I'm not sure if we've had, if it just was an off day, because keep in mind, this is one day, and maybe they can bring it back. And also, NYXL probably also has the endurance to go to best of 5s.
I think both teams do. In terms of both the teams that lost there, NYXL and Valiant, both of who were favored at the beginning of the playoffs in that semi-final match, I think both of them have the endurance to be able to bring it back, and I would not write either of them off. Now, are both of them going to be able to come back? Probably not. It would be very unlikely for both of them to execute reverse sweeps in this situation, but they both could. There are definitely very reasonable universes in which they do execute the reverse sweeps. And I think also I would refer people back to an episode of Watch the Overture, which I was not a part of, but which I very much enjoyed, which was the impact of patches in Overwatch, which I will link in the description, which was a very reasonable summary of the ridiculous impact of patches in Overwatch and the impact that they have had on results. And I would say it is almost incredible that we could have a patch hit before the playoffs that would turn an absolutely dominant team from the NYXL into a team which a lot of people who were keeping very good track of the scene would say had a 50-50 chance in the semi-final of not making it through. Because that was my feeling coming into this game, or coming into this series, was that I didn't know who was going to be able to win between Philly and New York, even if Philly weren't playing at their absolute best. Was just that the patch had changed so much about how you played around your Zenyatta, how much you were able to really get out of individual people, how much Philly would be able to get out of their double sniper situation, which suits them so well. it's just madness to me that we can have patches that happen
It's mad, yeah.
during the league that impact things so massively, that disrupt narratives. That I'm gonna cut myself off here because I can make an entire fucking video
Yeah.
about it. But it is truly mental. But I do agree with Matt that if NYXL cannot win even a single map in the semifinals, their only match in the playoffs,
Yes.
they will be every other factor,
Yeah.
even taken into account, they will be the most disappointing team
Yes.
of the season.
Yeah. Let me ask you this then. With the standings as they are, so I don't know when you will release this, but to restate, NYXL is 1 best of 5 down right now. London is 1 best of 5 up against Valiant. Given that with these 4 teams, which team has the highest chance of winning the Overwatch League in your estimation right now?
Out of Valiant and NYXL.
No, out of all the 4 teams that are.
Oh, all
currently.
the 4 teams. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting one, because if we had said this at the beginning of both of the semifinals, I would have said the LA Valiant. Because I think the LA Valiant, I was expecting to win over the London Spitfire. And then I think that I consider Philadelphia Fusion to be such an inconsistent team that I wasn't expecting them to bring an insane form that they would be able to beat the Valiant. And I think that even if NYXL were able to get through to the finals, this meta suits the LA Valiant much more. Now, having seen the games that happened today, I think that it's kind of crazy to bet on the Valiant, because they would have to execute a reverse sweep in terms of the series that they have before them on Friday, and then they would also have to win the finals. It just seems statistically unlikely. And so if I was to go for a literal odds-on bet right now, I would go for the Philadelphia Fusion.
Oh.
Because they look most likely to be able to continue their form into the game, into the rest of the semifinals. That game was weighed most heavily out of the 2 semifinals towards one team. Philadelphia Fusion looked more strong than NYXL compared to Spitfire over Valiant. Spitfire Valiant was actually pretty close. It was a 3-1 with also a draw on one map, where I thought the Valiant may have even been able to get back into the series. But Philadelphia NYXL was fairly, but the maps were fairly close, but they were all, in the end, the summation of all the fights was fairly one-sided towards the Philadelphia Fusion. So if they're able to keep that up, it seems that Philly would be able to do that. And whichever team they would be able to go against out of Spitfire or the Valiant, they do have the individual skill to be able to take it. Now, that would be nuts if the 6th seed ended up taking the overall Overwatch League. Yeah. And so part of me still wants to go with the Valiant, but they're in such a difficult situation now to win 2 series back-to-back against the Spitfire that it just seems like a bad bet to make. But if I was purely to go analytical of who I think has the advantage, I would still bet on I wouldn't bet on them, but I would still analytically take the LA Valiant, because at some point I expect both Philadelphia and London to dip, because they are, or have been, such inconsistent teams, and the LA Valiant, I think, will be able to recover from the performance that they had today. So I would go for still the team that I thought would be winning at the beginning of the semifinals, the LA Valiant. But I do concede that if London or Philly have great days, they are going to be able to take it, because they just have that much individual skill.
I think it's a pretty sweet situation where whatever you would have said could have all been reasonable, right?
Yes. And any final that happens in New York will be an excellent final. There is no bad final that could happen out of the semifinal teams we have. London, Philly, mad DPS, just like crashing into each other, just mad wave, like 2 tsunamis locking together. London against Philly. Sorry, not London, Philly. That's the one that I just said. Valiant, Philadelphia, a really structured team against a crazy DPS. They're trying to fend them off. The opposite way with New York against London. 2 full Korean teams at the peak of their game. London, it's like a replay of the Stage 1 finals. Both playing, Valiant, sorry, NYXL at that point would be the more structured team, and London would be the guys trying to overcome them. Any way you slice it, it's an awesome final. It's just, I think, sour in my mouth that New York could have such a great regular season and be fucked by the playoff
Yeah.
patch. That
That's also,
does leave a sour taste in my mouth.
it's also something needs to be said about the so in CS:GO they had the curse of the team that got the bye based on
Yes.
previously good performances. Well, we're seeing the same thing right now in the Overwatch League, right? Where the
Yeah.
two teams that were highest seeded and therefore got the direct qualification into the semifinals are now the teams that like look to be upset.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something with that format. What I would say about the question I posed is like, okay, theoretically, every team, if it was all the same team, every team would have a 25% chance of winning the Overwatch League at this point in time, right? Now, even with the scores in mind and the performance we've seen, I don't think any of the teams dips below 20% or any of the other teams rises above 35% in terms of strength. So we're looking at a performance range of like 20 to 30% for each of these teams to win the Overwatch League. And I think that kind of parity is pretty sweet, though I would have loved if it was actually, a culmination of the season where arguably, or based on standings, NYXL and Valiant were the most impressive teams. And we could have settled once and for all who the better team was in the big game situations. Obviously, yes. Valiant took a stage player from them. We could have settled all of this. This doesn't pass the eye test. If Valiant wins the Overwatch League, well, you can't. It's undeniable at this point, isn't it? Now, if I had to say who was the highest probability of winning the Overwatch League, my analytical mind still wants to tell me NYXL by a couple of percentage points, but I would go with London. And what better culmination of this entire series would it be than for us to have a Fusion London final where, sort of like the content created around the season and the disappointments we've had because we know what the potential of these teams holds. And then for them to meet in the finals, all obviously having upset the overdog in the semifinals, for them to come together, renewed, possibly at the highest peak that they achieved that season. I mean, that would be a marvelous conclusion of that of our series.
Would.
Sense, right?
It absolutely would. And so in that situation, presumably you would take London.
Yes, I would.
All right. I'll take you for your life savings then when Philadelphia win.
I'll just take you for your life.
Okay. and with that brutal attempt on my life, I think we should end this this mega episode before the playoffs of reviewing the Refute This and continue throughout the off season with the random shit that we've come up with in our brains.
Right.